The wind, a persistent nomad of the American West, never truly slept. It sighed through the skeletal remains of tumbleweeds, rustled the dry grasses of the prairie, and, on this particular late autumn afternoon, it moaned a low, melancholic tune around Silas Blackwood's sprawling yet weathered barn. Silas, a man etched by sun and struggle, leaned against the rough-hewn timber of the barn door, his gaze sweeping across the vast expanse of his land. The sky, a bruised canvas of purples and greys, threatened rain, a welcome prospect for the parched earth, but a harbinger of colder days to Silas. His ranch, nestled in a remote corner of Montana, was a testament to a life lived on the fringes of civilization. It was a place where the silence could be as deafening as any storm, and where a man's worth was measured by the sweat on his brow and the grit in his soul. Silas, a widower of 5 years, carried the weight of his solitude like a worn saddlebag, heavy, familiar, and a constant companion. His wife, Eleanor, had been the sunshine that chased away the harsh shadows of this unforgiving landscape, and since her passing, a perpetual twilight seemed to have settled over his heart. The barn, his primary concern today, was more than just a structure. It was a repository of memories, a sanctuary for his horses, and a symbol of his enduring fight against the encroaching wilderness. It had stood for over 50 years, a stoic sentinel against the elements, but time, like a relentless rustler, had begun to claim its dues. The roof sagged in places, timbers groaned under the strain of wind and snow, and a general air of disrepair clung to it like dust. Silas ran a calloused hand over the weathered wood. He'd inherited the ranch from his father, and his father before him. It was in his blood, this land, this life. But lately, a weariness had settled deep into his bones, a weariness that the biting wind seemed to amplify. He'd been wrestling with the decision to sell, to trade the solitude for a softer, perhaps less demanding life in town, but the thought of leaving this place, this legacy, felt like a betrayal. His gaze drifted to the far corner of the barn, a section he rarely frequented. It was where he stored old farm equipment, discarded tools, and the general detritus of a life spent tilling the soil. A thick layer of dust and cobwebs had accumulated there, obscuring whatever lay beneath. He'd been meaning to clear it out for years, but other, more pressing tasks always intervened. A sudden gust of wind rattled the barn doors, forcing Silas to grip them tighter. It carried with it a faint earthy scent, different from the usual aroma of hay and horse. Intrigued, he pushed himself away from the door and walked towards the cluttered corner. He kicked aside a broken plough and a stack of decaying burlap sacks. Beneath them, half hidden by shadow, was a section of the barn floor that seemed different. The wood was darker, newer perhaps, or simply less weathered than the surrounding planks. He knelt, his knees protesting the movement, and ran his fingers over the wood. It felt solid, yet there was a slight give beneath his touch. Curiosity, a forgotten ember in his pragmatic heart, began to glow. He fetched a crowbar from a nearby workbench, its cold metal a familiar comfort in his hand. With a grunt, he wedged the tip of the crowbar into the seam between two planks. The wood resisted at first, then groaned in protest as he applied pressure. A crack echoed in the otherwise silent barn. He worked at it, prying with all his might, until one of the planks shifted, revealing a dark void beneath. A cool, damp air wafted up, carrying a strange, mineral scent. Silas peered into the darkness, his eyes struggling to adjust. It was an opening, a hole leading down into the earth. It wasn't a shallow cellar. It descended into an impenetrable blackness. A shiver, unrelated to the chill in the air, traced its way down his spine. He'd lived on this ranch his entire life, worked every inch of it, and he'd never known this. This passage existed. What was it? An old well? A forgotten root cellar? The possibilities, though mundane, felt charged with an unsettling mystery. The wind outside seemed to pick up, its mournful cry now sounding like a whispered warning, urging him to leave the darkness undisturbed. But Silas Blackwood was not a man who shied away from the unknown, especially when it lay hidden beneath his own roof. The opening yawned before Silas, a silent invitation into the earth's embrace. The air that emanated from it was cool and carried a faint, earthy scent, tinged with something mineral, something ancient. He held his breath, straining his ears for any sound, any indication of what lay below. Only the persistent whisper of the wind outside and the frantic thumping of his own heart answered. He fetched a lantern from the workbench, its brass tarnished with age, and a box of matches. The flame, when it sputtered to life, cast a wavering orange glow that barely pushed back the encroaching darkness. He held the lantern over the opening, its light swallowed by the abyss. He could discern rough-hewn walls, not the smooth, finished stone of a well, but something more primitive, more natural. The opening was roughly circular, about 3 feet in diameter, and it seemed to lead downwards at a steep, but not vertical angle. A knot of apprehension tightened in Silas's gut. This was no ordinary discovery. His mind, usually so grounded in the practicalities of ranch life, began to spin with unsettling questions. Who dug this, and why? There was no record of such a structure in any of his father's notes or his grandfather's journals. It was as if the earth had swallowed this secret hole, only to reveal it now, under his very feet. He took a long, slow breath, his gaze fixed on the dark moor. The thought of turning away, of sealing it back up and pretending it never existed, flickered through his mind. But it was a fleeting temptation. A deep-seated curiosity, a primal urge to understand, warred with his ingrained caution. He was a man who had faced down stampedes, braved blizzards, and wrestled with drought. This dark hole, while unusual, was a challenge, and Silas Blackwood rarely backed down from a challenge. He tested the edge of the opening with his boot. It seemed stable enough. He needed to know what was down there. He decided to descend, but not without some precautions. He retrieved a length of sturdy rope from the barn's loft, its fibers thick and reliable. He tied one end securely around a heavy support beam, testing its strength with all his weight. Then he lowered the other end into the darkness, letting it dangle until it touched what felt like a solid floor. With the lantern held before him, he swung his leg over the edge. The initial descent was awkward, his boots finding purchase on the rough earth walls. The air grew colder, damper, and the mineral scent intensified, mingling with the musty odor of undisturbed earth. The wind's whisper seemed to fade, replaced by a profound, echoing silence that pressed in on him from all sides. He descended slowly, carefully, his muscles tensed. The rope was a lifeline, a comforting anchor in the disorienting descent. After what felt like an eternity, his boots finally touched firm ground. He released the rope and took a tentative step forward, his lantern casting a bobbing pool of light around him. He was in a tunnel, not a mine shaft, with its telltale signs of pickaxes and blasting, but something that looked almost natural, albeit widened and shaped by human hands. The walls were packed earth, reinforced in places with what looked like petrified wood or ancient stones. The floor was uneven, covered in a fine layer of dust. The tunnel stretched out before him, disappearing into the blackness beyond the lantern's reach. He took a few steps, his boots crunching softly on the dusty floor. The silence here was absolute, a heavy blanket that seemed to absorb all sound. It was an unnerving quiet, devoid of the usual creaks and groans of a living space, or even the subtle sounds of the earth above. He raised the lantern higher, its beam illuminating the passage. It was surprisingly wide, perhaps 6 feet high and 4 feet across, enough for a man to walk comfortably if stooped. He continued his exploration, his heart still beating a steady rhythm of apprehension and awe. The tunnel curved gently to the left, and as he rounded the bend, he saw it. More of the same packed earth and ancient stones, but this time there were markings. Faint, almost imperceptible etchings on the walls, swirling patterns that seemed to pulse with a silent energy under the lantern light. They weren't any symbols he recognized, not Native American, not pioneer. They were something older, something that spoke of a history far predating his own. He paused, tracing a finger over one of the etchings. It felt cool, smooth, and strangely resonant. A profound sense of being in a place untouched by time, a place that held secrets whispered by the very earth itself, washed over him. He was no longer just Silas Blackwood, rancher. He was an intruder, an accidental discoverer, standing on the threshold of something vast and unknown. The lantern flickered, casting dancing shadows that seemed to twist the ancient markings into unsettling shapes. He had to know where this tunnel led. Silas pressed onward, his initial apprehension slowly giving way to a profound sense of wonder and a growing unease. The tunnel was a labyrinth, its twists and turns seemingly designed to disorient and conceal. The markings on the walls persisted, growing more intricate and elaborate as he ventured deeper. They were not random scribbles, but deliberate patterns, flowing and interconnected, suggesting a language, a narrative, lost to the ages. He paused, holding the lantern close to a section of the wall. The etchings here depicted what looked like stylized figures, some human-like, others more abstract, engaged in activities he couldn't decipher. They seemed to be interacting with celestial bodies, with the earth itself, in a way that felt both alien and deeply spiritual. There were no depictions of violence, no weapons, no signs of conflict. It was a tapestry of a forgotten civilization, a silent testament to their existence. The air grew heavier, carrying a faint metallic tang that tickled his nostrils. It was a scent he couldn't place, something sharp and clean, yet ancient. He ran his hand along the wall, feeling the subtle variations in texture, the smoothness of the carved stone, the rough resilience of the packed earth. He marveled at the sheer labor involved, the dedication required to create such a passage with rudimentary tools, if indeed they were rudimentary. He noticed a change in the floor beneath his boots. The dust thinned, revealing patches of smooth, polished stone, interspersed with what looked like obsidian tiles, glinting dully in the lantern light. It spoke of deliberate construction, of a sophisticated understanding of engineering and artistry. This was no mere burrow. It was a deliberate construction, built for a purpose, by hands long turned to dust. As he rounded another bend, the tunnel opened into a larger space. His breath hitched. It was a chamber, roughly circular, perhaps 30 feet in diameter. The walls here were smoother, more finished, and the etchings were deeper, more pronounced. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, carved from a dark, unidentifiable stone. Upon it rested an object. Silas approached cautiously, his boots crunching on the obsidian tiles. The object on the pedestal was a sphere, about the size of a man's fist. It was made of a material that seemed to absorb the lantern light, giving off a faint internal luminescence, a soft, pearly glow. It was utterly smooth, seamless, and cool to the touch when he tentatively reached out a finger. There were no markings on it, no visible signs of craftsmanship, yet it radiated a palpable energy, a subtle vibration that hummed against his skin. He circled the pedestal, his gaze fixed on the sphere. What was it? A tool? An artifact? A source of power? The more he looked, the less he understood. It defied any earthly explanation he could conceive. His mind, accustomed to the tangible realities of farming, of horses, of the changing seasons, struggled to process this enigma. He remembered Eleanor, her gentle curiosity, her belief in the unseen wonders of the world. She would have been mesmerized by this place, by this object. A pang of loneliness, sharp and sudden, pierced through his awe. He wished she were here to share in this impossible discovery. He carefully lifted the sphere from the pedestal. It was surprisingly light, fitting perfectly into the palm of his hand. As he held it, a faint warmth spread through his fingers, and the internal glow seemed to intensify, casting a soft, ethereal light on his weathered face. He felt a strange sense of connection, as if the sphere was responding to his touch, to his presence. He looked back at the tunnel he had come through. It seemed like a passage from another world, a forgotten pathway leading to this hidden sanctuary. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this discovery had changed something within him. He couldn't simply seal it up and return to his old life. This place, this sphere, held a mystery that had captured his imagination, a mystery that whispered of secrets buried deep within the earth, and perhaps within himself. He carefully placed the sphere into his vest pocket, its faint warmth a constant reminder of its presence. He knew he would be back. This was just the beginning. The walk back through the tunnel felt different. The darkness, which had once seemed merely an absence of light, now felt charged with the presence of the sphere nestled in Silas's pocket. Its subtle warmth was a constant, tangible reminder of the extraordinary secret he now carried. Each step echoed with a new significance, each crunch of dust under his boots, a testament to his journey into the unknown. He found himself looking at the etched walls with a renewed sense of wonder, trying to decipher the silent stories they told, imagining the people who had carved them, who had walked these same paths millennia ago. Emerging back into the familiar, dusty confines of the barn felt like surfacing from a deep, dreamlike dive. The late afternoon sun, now lower in the sky, cast long dramatic shadows across the hay bales and scattered tools. The wind, a constant companion, continued its mournful serenade, but now, to Silas, it seemed to carry a different tone, one of secrecy, of guarded knowledge. He carefully placed the loose plank back into its position, then covered it with the old burlap sacks and the broken plough, doing his best to make it look undisturbed. He knew, however, that no matter how well he concealed it, the knowledge of the tunnel, of the chamber, of the glowing sphere, would forever remain etched in his mind, a hidden landscape beneath the familiar surface of his life. He lingered in the barn for a while, the scent of hay and horse manure now mingling with the faint mineral aroma that seemed to cling to his clothes, a lingering perfume from the depths. He ran a hand over the rough wood of the barn, his fingers tracing the grain, feeling the history embedded within. This place, which had always represented a tangible connection to his past, now held a profound, unsettling link to a past far more ancient and mysterious than he could have imagined. He looked at his hands, roughened by years of labor, now stained with the dust of a forgotten age. He felt a strange duality within himself, the Silas Blackwood who wrestled with the land, who cared for his horses, who worried about the coming winter, was still there. But now there was another Silas, a Silas who had touched the impossible, who held a secret that transcended the ordinary. He walked out of the barn and into the crisp autumn air, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. The vast Montana landscape, which had always been a source of both comfort and challenge, now seemed to hold a deeper resonance. He looked at the rolling hills, the distant mountains, the endless sky, and wondered what other secrets lay hidden beneath the surface of the world, waiting to be discovered. That evening, as he sat by the meager fire in his cabin, the sphere pulsed softly in his vest pocket, a silent heartbeat against his ribs. He found himself staring into the flames, his mind replaying the images of the chamber, the etchings, the glowing object. He knew he couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe him? They'd call him mad, a dreamer lost in the solitude. The secret was his alone to bear, a heavy yet strangely exhilarating burden. He thought about his life, the routines, the quiet predictability. It had been a life defined by hard work and quiet endurance. Now a seed of the extraordinary had been planted, a seed that promised to change the very soil of his existence. He felt a mixture of fear and excitement. The unknown was a dangerous territory, but it was also a frontier, a place where new possibilities, however improbable, could take root. He knew he would return to the tunnel. He had to. The sphere, with its subtle glow and faint warmth, was an enigma that called to him, a silent promise of revelations yet to come. He had stepped into a hidden world, and he realized with a dawning sense of inevitability that his life, as he knew it, would never be the same. The whisper of the wind outside no longer sounded melancholic. It sounded like a conspirator, sharing a secret that only he could hear. The days that followed were a strange blend of routine and anticipation. Silas went through the motions of ranch life, tending to his horses, mending fences, checking on his livestock, but his mind was rarely entirely on the task at hand. A part of him was always drawn back to the barn, to the hidden passage, to the silent chamber and its enigmatic sphere. The routine was a necessary anchor, a way to maintain a semblance of normalcy while his inner world was in such upheaval. He found himself scrutinizing the sphere whenever he was alone, taking it out of his pocket to study its soft, pearly glow in the privacy of his cabin. He noticed subtle shifts in its luminescence, fleeting patterns that danced within its depths, as if responding to his thoughts or the ambient light. He tried to feel its energy, to understand its nature, but it remained elusive, a mystery held within a perfect, smooth shell. One crisp morning, as he was riding his mare, Bess, across the northern pasture, he paused to scan the horizon. The vast, unbroken expanse of prairie stretched out before him, a familiar tapestry of brown and gold. Then he saw it, a faint plume of dust rising in the distance, moving steadily towards his ranch. His first instinct was a flicker of alarm. Strangers were rare in this isolated region. His nearest neighbor was miles away, and any passing travelers usually stuck to the main, albeit rough, trail that skirted his property several miles to the east. This dust cloud was coming from a direction that suggested a deliberate approach. He squinted, trying to make out any details. It was too far to discern any figures or vehicles, but the movement was steady, purposeful. A primal sense of caution, honed by years of self-reliance, settled over him. He wasn't expecting visitors, and the sudden appearance of one, especially one approaching so directly, felt unusual. He urged Bess into a trot, then a canter, heading back towards the ranch house. He needed to be prepared, though for what he couldn't quite articulate. The presence of the tunnel and the sphere had made him more attuned to the subtle shifts in his environment, more aware of the possibility of the unexpected. As he neared the house, he could make out the faint outline of a wagon, pulled by a pair of sturdy horses. It was still a good distance away, but he could now tell it was an old, well-maintained wagon, not the type of rickety cart some itinerant peddler might use. This suggested someone who knew the land, or at least was traveling with a degree of purpose. He dismounted Bess, patting her neck, his gaze still fixed on the approaching wagon. He walked into the cabin, his hand instinctively going to the rifle he kept mounted above the fireplace. He didn't draw it, but its familiar weight was a comforting presence. He looked at his vest pocket, where the sphere lay hidden. Was this related? He dismissed the thought as fanciful. Yet the timing was undeniably peculiar. He decided to meet the visitor at the edge of his property, near the main gate. He fetched his hat, cinched his belt, and walked out with a measured stride, trying to project an air of calm, watchful confidence. The wagon continued its steady progress, the dust cloud growing larger. As the wagon drew closer, Silas could finally make out the figure of the driver. It was a man, weathered and lean, with a gaze that seemed to hold a hint of both weariness and determination. He wore the practical clothing of a frontiersman, but there was something about his posture, his demeanor, that set him apart. He wasn't just passing through, he seemed to be on a mission. When the wagon finally stopped a respectful distance from Silas, the man tipped his hat. "Mr. Blackwood?" he called out, his voice carrying clearly on the wind. "That's me," Silas replied, his own voice steady, though his senses were on high alert. "My name is Jedediah Croft," the man said, stepping down from the wagon. He was taller than Silas had expected, and his eyes, a piercing blue, seemed to take in everything around him with a quiet intensity. "I've traveled a long way. I believe you found something of significance." Silas felt a jolt. "Found something?" he echoed, his mind racing. How could this stranger know? Had someone seen him? He hadn't been careless, had he? "I'm not sure what you're referring to, Mr. Croft." Jedediah offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "The earth sometimes yields its secrets, Mr. Blackwood, and sometimes those secrets speak to others, even across great distances. I'm here because I believe what you found concerns something I've been searching for a very long time." The words hung in the air, laden with unspoken meaning. Silas felt a chill creep up his spine, a feeling that this encounter was far from accidental, and that the hidden world beneath his barn had just begun to ripple outwards, touching the lives of others. Silas's gaze remained fixed on Jedediah Croft. The man's directness, his unnerving knowledge, put Silas on edge. He was a man who valued his privacy, his self-reliance, and the intrusion, however polite, felt like a breach. Yet there was something in Jedediah's demeanor, a quiet intensity, a sense of shared purpose, that compelled him to listen. "I don't know what you're talking about," Silas said again, his voice firm but betraying a hint of unease. He knew he had been careful, meticulously so, in concealing his discovery. Jedediah took a step closer, his blue eyes steady. "I understand your caution, Mr. Blackwood. These are strange things we're dealing with, but I assure you, I mean you no harm. In fact, I believe we may have a common interest." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I've been tracking certain anomalies in the earth, patterns, energies, things that suggest remnants of a civilization far older than anything recorded in our history books. And recently the signals have grown stronger, leading me to this region." Silas remained silent, his mind sifting through Jedediah's words. Anomalies? Energies? It sounded like the sort of talk that would get a man labeled a lunatic back in town. But then again, he himself had found a tunnel leading to an ancient chamber containing a glowing sphere. Perhaps the lines between sanity and delusion were blurrier than he'd ever imagined. "And you think I found one of these anomalies?" Silas asked, his skepticism warring with a growing curiosity. "I believe you have," Jedediah replied. "I felt a disturbance in the earth when I approached your property. A resonance. It's faint, but it's there. It matches patterns I've encountered before in places far more remote. He looked Silas directly in the eye. "Have you by any chance found something underground? Something that seems out of place?" Silas's heart gave a heavy thud. He couldn't lie to this man, not when he seemed to possess such an uncanny understanding of what he had discovered. He thought of the sphere, its gentle glow, the strange warmth it emanated. "I found a passage," Silas admitted, choosing his words carefully. "Under my barn. It leads to a chamber." Jedediah's expression remained impassive, but Silas detected a subtle shift, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "And in this chamber, did you find anything?" Silas hesitated. This was the crucial point. He could deny it, and Jedediah would likely leave, perhaps even report him. Or he could trust this stranger, this man who seemed to understand the inexplicable. He thought of Eleanor, of her open heart, her willingness to believe in the extraordinary. He took a deep breath. "There was an object," Silas said, his voice low. "A sphere. It glows." Jedediah Croft closed his eyes for a moment, a faint exhalation escaping his lips. When he opened them again, there was a profound sense of relief, mixed with something akin to awe. "I knew it," he murmured. "The Heartstone. That's what the Whispers call it, in the few fragmented texts that speak of these ancient ones." "Heartstone," Silas repeated, the name feeling both alien and strangely familiar. "It is said to be a repository of knowledge, a key," Jedediah explained, "a remnant of a people who understood the very fabric of existence, in ways we can only dream of. I've been searching for it for years, following rumors, deciphering fragments of ancient lore. I never imagined it would be found in a place like this, so close to the settled lands." Silas felt a wave of disbelief wash over him, followed by a surge of intrigue. He had stumbled upon something far more significant than he had ever imagined. This wasn't just a curiosity. It was an artifact of immense historical and perhaps even cosmic importance. But how? Who were these people? Silas asked, his mind reeling. "That is what I hope to discover, Mr. Blackwood. And with your cooperation, perhaps we can learn together," Jedediah said, his gaze earnest. "The Heartstone is not meant to be kept hidden, nor is it meant to be exploited. It carries a great responsibility, and I believe its rediscovery may herald significant changes." Silas looked at his weathered hands, then at the vast empty plains stretching out before him. His life had been one of quiet routine, of predictable challenges. Now he found himself on the precipice of something that could reshape his understanding of the world, and perhaps the world itself. He realized that the tunnel beneath his barn was not just a passage into the earth, but a gateway to a destiny he had never anticipated. The conversation with Jedediah Croft continued under the vast Montana sky, the wind their only witness. Silas, still grappling with the magnitude of Jedediah's claims, found himself drawn into the stranger's quiet intensity and the compelling logic of his pursuit. Jedediah spoke of ancient peoples, of a lost civilization that had harnessed energies and understood principles far beyond current human comprehension. He spoke of the Heartstone not as a mere artifact, but as a conduit, a repository of wisdom that could offer profound insights into the universe, but also held immense potential for misuse if it fell into the wrong hands. "These ancient ones, they didn't leave behind monuments of stone and conquest," Jedediah explained, his voice resonating with a deep respect. "Their legacy is subtle, woven into the very fabric of the earth, detectable only by those who know where and how to look. The Heartstone is one of their most potent creations, designed to preserve their knowledge and, perhaps, to guide future generations." Silas listened intently, picturing the glowing sphere, the intricate etchings on the chamber walls. It all began to coalesce, forming a picture far grander and more mysterious than he had initially conceived. He thought of Eleanor, and how she would have embraced this revelation, her eyes alight with wonder. "But why me? Why here?" Silas asked, the question echoing his own bewilderment. "Destiny, perhaps," Jedediah offered, a faint smile touching his lips. "Or perhaps it's simply a matter of being in the right place at the right time. The earth shifts, Mr. Blackwood. Secrets are revealed when they are meant to be. I believe your discovery of the tunnel was no accident. The Heartstone, it called to you, in its own way." Silas felt a shiver run down his spine. The idea that he, a simple rancher, had been chosen or at least guided to find such an artifact was humbling and daunting. "I don't have any special knowledge, Mr. Croft, I'm just a rancher. And that, Mr. Blackwood, is precisely why you are the right person, Jedediah said. You possess a groundedness, a connection to the land that is essential. You are not driven by ambition or a thirst for power. Your concern is for your home, for the earth beneath your feet. This is a purity of intent that is rare and invaluable when dealing with something as potent as the Heartstone. He then spoke of his own journey, of years spent poring over ancient texts, of arduous expeditions to remote corners of the world, all in pursuit of the elusive remnants of this lost civilization. He spoke of the dangers, not from malicious forces, but from the very nature of the energies involved, and the potential for human greed to corrupt their purpose. I've seen what happens when such power is sought for selfish reasons, Jedediah said, his voice darkening. It leads to destruction, not enlightenment. That is why I am here. I believe you understand the gravity of this discovery, and I believe we can protect it and perhaps learn from it together. Silas considered Jedediah's words. The man's sincerity was palpable, his knowledge undeniable. The idea of protecting this ancient artifact, of ensuring it was used for good, resonated deeply with him. He thought of his own solitude, the emptiness left by Eleanor's passing, and a new purpose began to form within him. Perhaps this discovery was not just a burden, but an opportunity to contribute to something larger than himself, to honor the memory of his wife by embracing a new, unexpected path. "What do you propose we do?" Silas asked, his voice firming with resolve. Jedediah looked at him, a flicker of hope in his blue eyes. "For now we maintain the secrecy. We must ensure no one else becomes aware of the Heartstone. I will stay here for a time at least. We can work together, examine the chamber, the artifacts, and try to understand what we have found. I have brought supplies, tool, and a deep well of knowledge." He gestured towards his wagon. "I can make camp some distance from your house, discreetly. We can meet daily at dawn and dusk to discuss our findings and plan our next steps. We must be cautious, Mr. Blackwood. The world is not yet ready for this knowledge, but perhaps, with time and careful study, it can be." Silas nodded. The thought of sharing this secret, of not carrying it entirely alone, brought a measure of relief. He looked at Jedediah, a stranger who had appeared like a ghost from the past, and felt a nascent sense of trust. "Agreed," Silas said. "We'll keep it safe, and we'll learn." He extended his hand, and Jedediah clasped it firmly, the grip of a man who understood the weight of the secret they now shared. The following days were a blur of furtive activity and hushed conversations. Silas and Jedediah established a discreet camp a mile from the ranch house, hidden among a copse of ancient wind-bent pines. Jedediah, true to his word, was a man of few words but immense capability, setting up a functional camp with minimal fuss. Their meetings, held in the pre-dawn chill and the fading light of dusk, became the focal point of Silas's existence. Silas, armed with his newfound purpose and Jedediah's guidance, felt a renewed sense of energy. He was no longer just a solitary rancher. He was a guardian of a profound secret. The weight of that responsibility was immense, but it was tempered by the shared burden, by Jedediah's quiet wisdom and unwavering dedication. Today, however, was different. They were returning to the chamber. Silas, under Jedediah's instruction, had brought additional supplies, a sturdier lantern, a small sturdy spade, and a coil of finer rope. Jedediah carried a satchel filled with what looked like notebooks, charcoal pencils, and several carefully wrapped metallic instruments. Descending into the tunnel once more, Silas felt a familiar mix of trepidation and excitement. The air was still cool and damp, the mineral scent still present, but now it was overlaid with the faint aroma of Jedediah's campfire. The silence was still profound, but it no longer felt oppressive. It felt expectant, as if the very earth held its breath in their presence. They reached the chamber, the Heartstone resting on its pedestal, still emitting its soft, pearly glow. Jedediah approached it with a reverence Silas found deeply moving. He didn't touch it immediately. Instead, he circled it, his eyes scanning every detail of the chamber. "Remarkable," Jedediah murmured, his voice hushed. "The construction, the material, it's unlike anything I've encountered. The wear patterns on the floor suggest centuries, perhaps millennia, of consistent, deliberate use. This wasn't a burial site, nor a place of worship as we understand it. It was a nexus, a point of connection." He then turned his attention to the walls, pulling out a notebook and charcoal pencil. "These glyphs," he said, tracing one with his finger, careful not to touch it directly. "They are not merely decorative. They form a narrative, a scientific treatise, perhaps even a warning. I need to document them meticulously." Silas watched as Jedediah began his work, his movements precise and methodical. He would sketch a section of the wall, then make notes in a language Silas didn't understand, filled with symbols that seemed as ancient as the etchings themselves. Silas, meanwhile, was tasked with carefully clearing the fine layer of dust and debris from the floor, using the spade with utmost care, and then examining the edges of the chamber for any further clues. He worked quietly, his senses heightened. He noticed subtle variations in the texture of the walls, areas where the packed earth seemed to give way to a harder, crystalline substance. He found small, smooth stones scattered near the base of the walls, unlike any he'd seen in the surrounding earth. They were cool to the touch and seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Jedediah, meanwhile, was engrossed in his task. "The patterns," he said without looking up, "they depict the flow of energy, the celestial cycles, the very structure of matter. These people understood the universe on a fundamental level, Mr. Blackwood. They saw the connections that bind everything together." Silas brought one of the small dark stones to Jedediah. "What do you make of these?" Jedediah took the stone, turning it over in his hand. His eyes widened slightly. "Fascinating. This is solidified resonance, a byproduct of the energies that flowed through this place, each one a tiny echo of the Heartstone's power." He then turned his attention back to the Heartstone itself. "It's time to examine the source more closely." He produced one of his metallic instruments, a slender, rod-like device with a delicate sensor at the tip. He held it near the Heartstone, and the device emitted a series of soft clicks and hums. Jedediah frowned, then adjusted a dial. The sounds changed. "It's emitting a complex energy signature," he explained. "Not heat, not radiation as we understand it. It's coherent, focused. It's as if it's constantly transmitting information, but without a discernible carrier wave." He paused, his brow furrowed in thought. "It's as if it's waiting." Waiting for what? Silas wondered. Waiting for the right touch, the right mind. He looked at the Heartstone, its gentle glow now seeming to hold an almost conscious awareness. He felt a profound sense of awe, and a growing understanding that his life, once defined by the predictable rhythms of the prairie, had irrevocably shifted, pulled into the orbit of this ancient luminous mystery. The hours spent in the chamber with Jedediah were transformative. Silas, once driven by the practicalities of survival, now found himself immersed in the intellectual and perhaps even spiritual exploration of an ancient enigma. Jedediah, with his methodical approach and encyclopedic knowledge, acted as a translator, guiding Silas through the labyrinthine concepts hinted at by the glyphs and the Heartstone itself. Jedediah spent hours meticulously sketching the wall etchings, meticulously cataloguing each symbol, each flow of energy depicted. He spoke of the ancient civilization, not as mythical beings, but as highly advanced beings who had achieved a profound understanding of natural laws. "They didn't conquer nature, Mr. Blackwood," Jedediah explained, his voice filled with reverence. "They harmonized with it. They saw the universe as an interconnected web of energy, and they learned to navigate its currents." Silas, in turn, focused on the tangible aspects of the chamber. He carefully collected samples of the strange crystalline dust and the dark, smooth stones, placing them in small, labeled pouches Jedediah had provided. He felt a growing sense of responsibility, not just to protect the Heartstone, but to understand its purpose, to honor the intentions of its creators. He realized that the Heartstone wasn't merely an object of power. It was a key, a library, a silent testament to a forgotten wisdom. As Jedediah worked, he began to piece together fragments of the narrative depicted on the walls. He spoke of a time when this civilization flourished, a time of great understanding and balance. But the etchings also hinted at a coming cataclysm, a cosmic shift that threatened their existence. The Heartstone, he theorized, was created as a safeguard, a way to preserve their knowledge, and perhaps to offer guidance to future sentient life that might emerge. "It seems they foresaw a period of great disruption," Jedediah explained, pointing to a series of symbols depicting celestial bodies in erratic motion, a time when the natural order would be challenged. "They left the Heartstone here, in this stable, hidden place, hoping that one day when the time was right, someone would find it and remember. Silas looked at the heartstone, its glow seeming to deepen as Jedediah spoke. He felt a profound connection to this ancient civilization, a sense of shared humanity across the vast gulf of time. Eleanor, he knew, would have been fascinated by their understanding of the universe, their harmonious existence. "So, it's a message?" Silas asked, his voice hushed. "A message from the past for the future?" "Precisely," Jedediah confirmed, his eyes alight with the thrill of discovery. "A message of hope, of wisdom, and of caution. It speaks of the delicate balance of life, of the interconnectedness of all things, and it suggests that even in the face of overwhelming change, knowledge and understanding can prevail." He then turned his attention to the heartstone itself, holding one of his instruments near it. "The energy it emits, it's not static. It's dynamic. It's adapting, reacting. I believe it's waiting for a specific resonance, a specific alignment of understanding." Silas reached out, his hand hovering inches above the heartstone. He felt a faint warmth emanating from it, a gentle pulse that seemed to synchronize with his own heartbeat. It was more than just an object. It felt alive, aware. "It feels like it's trying to communicate," Silas said, his voice barely a whisper. Jedediah nodded, a rare smile gracing his lips. "That is my hypothesis as well, Mr. Blackwood. This is not just a discovery, it is an awakening. The heartstone is not merely a record, but a catalyst. And I believe, with your groundedness and my knowledge, we are the ones meant to understand its message and perhaps to help usher in a new era of understanding." As they prepared to leave the chamber, Silas looked back at the glowing sphere, a beacon of ancient wisdom in the silent darkness. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his soul that his life had been irrevocably altered. The quiet solitude of his ranch had become the sanctuary for a secret that promised to reshape his world, and perhaps the world beyond. The tunnel beneath his barn had indeed led him to a place from which he would never come back the same. Dust motes dance in the slivers of sunlight piercing the barn's weathered planks. The air is thick with the scent of hay, dry earth, and a faint metallic tang that Elias can't quite place. He stands at the edge of the gaping hole in the barn floor, his heart thrumming a nervous rhythm against his ribs. The tunnel, it's real, not a figment of his strained imagination, but a dark, tangible maw leading into the unknown. He'd spent weeks obsessing over the strange drafts, the hollow sounds beneath his feet, dismissing them as old house quirks. Now the truth gapes at him, a stark, unbelievable reality. He tosses a loose stone into the darkness. The clatter echoes for a surprisingly long time before fading into an unnerving silence. How deep is it? Where does it go? His grandfather, a man of few words and fewer explanations, had never mentioned anything like this. Elias runs a calloused hand over the rough-hewn timbers surrounding the opening. The wood is old, ancient even, worn smooth by time and countless hands. But this is recent, or at least not as old as the barn itself. It's too clean, too deliberate. He kneels, peering into the oppressive blackness. A faint, cool breeze, carrying that peculiar metallic scent, wafts up. It's not the damp, earthy smell of a root cellar or an abandoned well. This is different, cleaner, almost sterile, yet undeniably ancient. He can make out the beginning of what looks like rough-hewn steps, disappearing into the gloom. A shiver, unrelated to the cool air, traces its way down his spine. His mind, usually so grounded in the practicalities of ranch life, races with unsettling possibilities. He'd always prided himself on his rational mind, his ability to solve problems with sweat and common sense. But this defies easy explanation. It's like stepping out of his familiar world and into a storybook, one he's not sure he wants to read. He glances back at the sunlit barn, the familiar stacks of hay, the worn tools hanging on the wall. Everything here speaks of normalcy, of a life he understands. But down there in the darkness lies a mystery that tugs at him with an irresistible force. It's a primal urge, a whisper of adventure and discovery that he hasn't felt since he was a boy, dreaming of far-off lands. He retrieves his lantern from where he'd set it down near the barn door. The glass is grimy, the wick a little frayed, but it's his most reliable source of light. He checks the fuel, almost full. Good. He'll need every bit of it. His mind flashes to Sarah, her worried eyes, her gentle pleas for him to be careful. He'd brushed her off, eager to find the source of the anomaly, to prove to himself, and perhaps to her, that he wasn't just chasing shadows. He tightens his grip on the lantern, the metal warm against his palm. He knows with a certainty that settles deep in his gut that he can't just leave it. He has to know what's down there. He has to understand. It's a dangerous curiosity, a dangerous path, but one he feels compelled to walk. He takes a deep breath, the scent of hay and something alien filling his lungs, and swings his leg over the edge of the hole, lowering himself onto the first rough step. The darkness swallows him, and the familiar world of the barn recedes above. The descent is steeper than it appeared from above. Elias's boots scrape against the stone, each sound amplified in the enclosed space. The lantern light, a hesitant, flickering beacon, pushes back the immediate darkness, but only just. The tunnel walls are rough-hewn, uneven, as if carved by primitive tools or by some force of nature that Elias can't comprehend. The metallic scent is stronger here, mingling with the scent of damp earth and something else, something like ozone or charged air. It prickles at his senses, a subtle warning that this is no ordinary excavation. He reaches a landing, a small, uneven platform. The tunnel continues downwards, a sheer drop now with no discernible steps. Elias shines his lantern down, the beam swallowed by an immense blackness. He can't see the bottom. A knot of unease tightens in his stomach. He's not a spelunker, he's a rancher. This is beyond his preparedness. He takes a moment to catch his breath, listening. The silence is profound, broken only by the faint drip, drip, drip of unseen water and the erratic beat of his own heart. He shines the lantern beam along the walls of the small landing. They are smooth in places, impossibly so, as if polished by centuries of... What? He can't imagine. There are faint markings, barely discernible, etched into the stone. They aren't carvings, not in the traditional sense. They look more like circuits, or some kind of intricate alien script. He runs his fingers over them, feeling the cool, smooth surface. They are utterly foreign, unlike anything he's ever encountered. He pulls out his pocket knife, a sturdy, familiar tool. He tries to scrape a small section of the wall to test its composition. The blade skitters across the surface, barely leaving a scratch. It's harder than steel. This isn't natural rock. A wave of disorientation washes over him. He's in a tunnel, deep beneath his barn, carved from a material he can't identify, with walls that bear markings that defy explanation. He remembers the old stories his grandfather used to tell, not of ghosts or spirits, but of strange lights in the sky, of peculiar occurrences that the old-timers dismissed as folklore. Elias had always filed those away as the ramblings of men who'd spent too much time under the sun. Now, he's not so sure. He decides he needs to descend. Retreating now would feel like a surrender to fear, and Elias is not one to surrender. He searches the landing for any handholds. He finds a thick, metallic cable, almost invisible against the dark wall, running downwards. It feels cool to the touch, yet strangely resilient. He tests it with his weight. It holds firm. He secures the lantern to his belt, its light now swinging erratically as he grips the cable. Taking another deep breath, he begins his descent. His muscles strain, his hands ache from the grip, but he forces himself downward, inch by painstaking inch. The air grows colder, the metallic scent more pronounced, almost acrid. He feels a strange pressure building in his ears, and a faint hum, barely perceptible, begins to vibrate through the cable and into his bones. He is moving deeper into something profoundly unknown, and the weight of that realization presses down on him, heavier than the earth above. The cable ends abruptly, depositing Elias onto a vast open floor. He lets go, his hands burning, and stumbles forward a few steps, his lantern beam sweeping across an enormous chamber. It's not a cave, it's something else entirely. The walls are impossibly smooth, curving upwards into a darkness far beyond the reach of his lantern. The air here is still and cool, carrying that persistent metallic scent, now tinged with something faintly sweet, like petrichor after a long-awaited rain. The chamber is circular, and in its center, bathed in the dim, shifting light of his lantern, lies a structure. It's a complex arrangement of metallic conduits, crystalline formations, that pulse with a faint, internal luminescence and what appear to be dormant energy fields. It's unlike anything he has ever seen, utterly alien in its design and purpose. It hums with a low, resonant frequency that vibrates not just in the air, but within his very bones. Elias stands frozen, mesmerized and terrified. His rational mind struggles to process what his eyes are seeing. This is not man-made. It couldn't be. The scale, the materials, the sheer incomprehensible complexity of it all. It speaks of a technology, or perhaps a natural phenomenon far beyond human comprehension. He feels like an ant staring at a galaxy. He cautiously approaches the central structure, his boots making soft thuds on the smooth floor. He keeps the lantern held high, its light glinting off the strange opalescent surfaces. He notices that the crystalline formations are arranged in precise geometric patterns, and the conduits seem to be interconnected in a way that suggests a deliberate design. As he draws closer, one of the crystalline structures near him begins to glow brighter. A soft, ethereal blue light emanates from within, casting eerie shadows across the chamber. He stops, his breath catching in his throat. The light intensifies, and a low harmonic tone emerges from the crystal, a sound that is both beautiful and unsettling. He raises a hand as if to shield himself, but then hesitates. There's no heat emanating from the light, no sense of danger, only a strange magnetic pull. He can feel a subtle shift in the air around him, a tingling sensation on his skin. The markings he saw on the tunnel walls are present here too, etched into the base of the structure, glowing with the same faint blue light. He remembers Sarah's words, "Be careful, Elias. Some things are better left undisturbed." He dismissed her worries as the overactive imagination of someone who'd spent too much time in books. Now he's starting to understand her fear. He's stumbled upon something ancient, something powerful, something that doesn't belong to his world. The question gnawing at him is, what is it? And more importantly, why is it here beneath his barn? The blue light from the crystal intensifies, bathing Elias in its otherworldly glow. The harmonic tone deepens, resonating within his chest. He feels a strange sense of calm washing over him, a peace he hasn't experienced in years, not since before the ranch began to falter, before the weight of responsibility settled so heavily on his shoulders. It's a seductive feeling, an invitation to let go. He notices that as the crystal brightens, the metallic scent in the air softens, replaced by that faint, sweet aroma, now more pronounced, like blooming night jasmine. He takes a tentative step closer, drawn by an unseen force. He reaches out a hand, his fingers trembling slightly, towards the pulsing crystal. Just as his fingertips are about to make contact, a faint flicker of movement catches his eye. In the periphery of the lantern's glow, something shifts. It's subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to jolt him out of his trance. He pulls his hand back, his heart hammering. He sweeps the lantern beam across the chamber again, his gaze sharp, searching. The movement he saw was near the edge of the main structure, a shadowy recess he hadn't paid much attention to. As the light falls upon it, he sees it, a dark, metallic hatch, almost seamlessly integrated into the curving wall. It's partially ajar. The blue light from the crystal dims slightly, the harmonic tone receding, as if reacting to his discovery. The sweetness in the air fades, and the metallic tang returns, sharper now, almost acrid. The calm he felt evaporates, replaced by a prickling unease. This isn't just a relic, it's a gateway. Elias approaches the hatch, his movements cautious. He can feel the hum of the structure beneath his feet, a low thrum of latent power. He pushes against the hatch. It swings inward with a soft, almost inaudible hiss, revealing another passage, this one even darker and more confined than the tunnel he descended. He shines his lantern into the opening. The passage seems to be made of the same smooth, dark material, and a faint, constant airflow emanates from it, carrying that strange metallic scent. He can hear a faint, rhythmic whirring sound from within, like machinery operating at a low level. His mind races. He came down here looking for an explanation for the drafts, the sounds. He found this, a structure of unknown origin, pulsing with light and sound, and now a passage leading further into the unknown. The initial thrill of discovery has been replaced by a growing sense of dread. This feels like more than just an old secret. It feels like something he's not meant to find. He checks his lantern. The fuel is still good, but the flame seems to flicker more erratically now, as if reacting to the strange energies of the chamber. He looks back at the hole he entered from, a distant point of light far above. He could go back, he could seal it up, pretend he never saw it, and try to forget this impossible place. But the instinct to know, to understand, is a powerful force. He tightens his grip on the lantern and steps through the hatch, leaving the softly glowing chamber behind. The air in the second tunnel is colder, sharper. The metallic tang is so strong now it almost burns his nostrils. The rhythmic whirring is louder here, a constant, low thrum that seems to vibrate through the very walls. Elias moves with his lantern held out in front of him, his shadow dancing erratically on the smooth, dark surfaces. The passage is narrow, barely wide enough for him to walk comfortably, and it slopes gently downwards. He examines the walls again. They are lined with a fine network of what look like illuminated veins, pulsing with a faint internal light that supplements the lantern's glow. These veins are arranged in intricate patterns, forming complex geometric designs that seem to shift and reconfigure as he watches. It's like walking through a living circuit board. He notices small panels embedded in the walls at regular intervals. They are dark and featureless, but as his lantern beam passes over them, they flicker to life for a brief moment, displaying a series of symbols that are utterly incomprehensible. They are not letters, not numbers, not any form of writing he's ever encountered. They are angular, precise, and seem to convey information in a way that bypasses language. His progress is slow. The tunnel seems to stretch on endlessly, a monotonous passage of dark, smooth walls and faint, pulsing lights. He feels a growing sense of isolation, a profound disconnect from the world he knows. He thinks of Sarah again, of the warmth of her kitchen, the scent of baking bread. He'd promised her he'd be careful, that he wouldn't do anything foolish. He's starting to doubt if he's keeping that promise. He hears a new sound distinct from the whirring. It's a faint clicking noise, irregular and sharp. He stops, holding his breath, straining to hear. It comes again, closer this time. It sounds mechanical. He raises his lantern higher, peering into the darkness ahead. The tunnel appears to curve slightly, and he can't see what's around the bend. The clicking grows louder, more insistent. It's no longer just a background noise. It's a presence. He feels a prickle of fear, sharper and more immediate than anything he's felt so far. He's not alone, or rather, there's something else down here with him. His hand instinctively goes to the heavy wrench he'd tucked into his belt, a poor substitute for a weapon, but all he has. He moves forward again, more slowly now, his senses on high alert. The rhythmic whirring seems to intensify, and the pulsing veins in the walls glow brighter, as if in response to his proximity. The clicking sound is just ahead, on the other side of the bend. He steels himself, takes a steadying breath, and rounds the curve. The tunnel opens slightly into a small alcove. And there, suspended in the air by unseen mechanisms, is a device. It's a sphere about the size of a grapefruit, made of a dark, iridescent metal. Small, articulated arms extend from its surface, and at the end of one arm, a sharp, metallic probe clicks rhythmically against the tunnel wall. It's this sound he's been hearing. The sphere hovers silently, its probe scanning the wall, seemingly oblivious to his presence. Elias stares at the hovering sphere, his mind struggling to categorize it. It's like nothing he's ever encountered. Not an animal, not an insect, not any kind of machine he could recognize. It moves with an unnerving fluidity, its articulated arms extending and retracting with silent precision. The probe continues its rhythmic clicking against the wall, a monotonous percussion in the otherwise alien soundscape. He stays frozen, unwilling to make any sudden movements that might startle the device. He shines his lantern on it, the beam reflecting off its dark, iridescent surface. The sphere seems to absorb the light rather than reflect it fully, giving it a slightly indistinct quality. The symbols he saw on the panels are subtly etched into its surface, glowing faintly with the same internal light as the veins in the walls. He notes that the probe isn't damaging the wall. It seems to be reading it, perhaps analyzing the composition or gathering data from the illuminated veins. Elias wonders if this is some kind of automated maintenance drone or a geological scanner, or something far more complex. The sheer alienness of its design and function is disorienting. He slowly raises his other hand, the one not holding the lantern, and makes a small beckoning gesture. The sphere doesn't react. He takes a tentative step forward. Still no reaction. He takes another step. The probe continues its clicking, oblivious. It seems to be programmed for a specific task, unaware or unconcerned with his intrusion. He decides to try and get a closer look at the symbols on its surface. He slowly circles the sphere, keeping a safe distance. The articulated arms shift slightly as he moves, but the probe remains fixed on the wall. He can see that the symbols are incredibly intricate, far more detailed than those on the wall panels. They seem to shimmer and flow as if alive. Suddenly the probe stops clicking. The articulated arms retract, and the sphere rotates slowly to face Elias. The faint internal light intensifies, and the symbols on its surface begin to glow brighter. Elias's breath catches. It's noticed him. A soft, melodic hum emanates from the sphere, different from the general thrum of the tunnel. It's a series of complex tones that seem to convey a question, or perhaps a greeting. Elias, utterly bewildered, can only stare. He has no way to respond. He's a rancher from rural America, not an intergalactic diplomat. He slowly lowers the wrench from his belt, a gesture of non-aggression. He holds his hands up, palms outward, a universal sign of peace, or so he hopes. The sphere hovers for a moment, its internal lights pulsing, then emits another sequence of tones, this one softer, almost inquisitive. He wonders if this is a test. If he shows fear or aggression, what will happen? He tries to project calm, to convey that he means no harm. He speaks softly, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "Hello, I don't mean any trouble. I found this place." The sphere emits a series of rapid clicks, and the illuminated veins in the wall beside it begin to pulse faster. The overall hum of the tunnel seems to rise in pitch. Elias feels a wave of anxiety. He's clearly not communicating effectively. He's only made things more confusing. The sphere, after its rapid clicking and altered hum, drifts slowly away from Elias, moving further down the tunnel. The pulsing veins on the wall resume their steady rhythm, but the air feels charged, different. Elias watches it go, a mix of relief and apprehension swirling within him. It didn't attack, that's a good sign, but it's also moved on, seemingly abandoning him, leaving him deeper in this unknown place. He realizes he has a choice to make. He can follow the sphere, trusting that it's leading him somewhere or away from danger, or he can try to retrace his steps, to find his way back to the barn, to the familiar world. The thought of the sun on his face, the smell of fresh air, is incredibly tempting. But the mystery of this place, the sheer impossibility of it, is a hook sunk deep into his curiosity. He can't just leave. He looks at his lantern. The fuel is still good, but he knows he can't rely on it indefinitely. He needs to understand what he's found. He needs to know where this tunnel leads, what that structure is, and what that sphere was. He takes a deep breath and decides to follow. He walks in the direction the sphere went, his footsteps quiet on the smooth floor. The tunnel continues its descent, the air growing colder. The illuminated veins in the walls are more prevalent now, forming intricate, swirling patterns that seem to draw the eye. He feels a faint warmth emanating from them, a gentle heat that contrasts with the ambient chill. He reaches a point where the tunnel widens into a larger cavern. The sphere is hovering in the center, its internal lights brighter now, casting a soft, pulsating glow. In this cavern, the walls are covered with vast, intricate murals. They are not painted, but etched into the material itself, glowing with the same internal light as the veins. These murals depict scenes of incredible scope and complexity. They show celestial bodies, vast cosmic landscapes, and beings of light and energy moving through the void. There are also images of what appear to be cities, built on impossible scales, reaching towards distant stars. And then the murals shift, showing what look like ships, sleek and alien, traversing the cosmos. Elias is stunned into silence. His mind struggles to comprehend the narrative unfolding before him. This isn't just a tunnel, it's a pathway, a conduit leading to somewhere. And the murals, he realizes with a growing sense of awe and dread, are telling a story. A story of a civilization that traveled among the stars, a civilization that existed long before humanity, a civilization that may have visited Earth. He notices a section of the mural that seems to depict a landing. A sleek alien craft descends from the sky, touching down on a landscape that looks remarkably like the plains surrounding his ranch. He stares, his blood running cold. Is this a record? A historical account? Or a prophecy? The sphere drifts towards him, emitting a soft, questioning tone. It hovers just a few feet away, its internal lights pulsing in time with the glowing murals. Elias looks from the sphere to the incredible images, his sense of reality dissolving. He's not just exploring a tunnel, he's stumbled upon the lost history of the universe, a history that is somehow intertwined with his own land, his own existence. The weight of this discovery is almost unbearable. Elias stands transfixed, his gaze sweeping across the vast luminous murals. The story depicted is overwhelming. He sees epochs of cosmic history unfold, the birth of stars, the formation of galaxies, the silent, majestic dance of celestial bodies. Then the focus shifts, narrowing to a particular solar system, a small blue planet teeming with nascent life. He recognizes Earth. The murals then illustrate the arrival of the beings depicted in the earlier cosmic scenes. They are not physical in the way Elias understands life, but more like sentient energy, capable of manifesting in various forms. They are depicted as observers, researchers, subtly interacting with the planet's developing ecosystems. There are images of them studying the oceans, the continents, and the early forms of life. He sees depictions of them leaving, their advanced vessels disappearing into the star-dusted canvas of space, only to return millennia later. The return is shown with a sense of urgency, of purpose. The murals depict a specific location, a vast, fertile plain dotted with what appear to be ancient rock formations. Elias recognizes it as the very land his family has farmed for generations. A specific mural captures his attention. It shows a single, sleek craft descending from a star-streaked sky, landing precisely where his barn now stands. Tiny, almost insignificant figures are shown disembarking, their forms indistinct, but radiating an aura of intelligence and purpose. They carry what appear to be instruments and they begin to work, their actions depicted with meticulous detail. Elias realizes with a jolt that the tunnel and the structure within it are not natural formations or ancient ruins. They are constructs built by these beings for a purpose he can only begin to guess at. The smooth walls, the illuminated veins, the strange metallic scent, it all begins to make a terrifying kind of sense. The sphere hovers closer, its melodic hum a constant, gentle presence. Elias turns to it, a question forming on his lips, but he stops himself. How could he possibly ask? He's looking at evidence of a civilization that predates humanity, a civilization that left its mark on his own land in ways he never imagined. He notices another section of the mural depicting a more recent event. It shows a single figure, small and isolated, standing on the land. The figure appears to be observing something hidden beneath the earth. It's a scene that resonates deeply with Elias, mirroring his own actions in the barn. He runs a hand over the cool, smooth surface of the wall, tracing the glowing lines. These beings, they were here. They built this, and they left. But why? What was their purpose? And why did they build this intricate structure beneath his land? He feels a profound sense of insignificance, yet also a strange connection. His family's history, his life, are now interwoven with this cosmic narrative. The isolation he felt on the ranch suddenly feels amplified tenfold. He is a custodian of a secret he never knew existed. He looks at the sphere again. It seems to be waiting, observing him, perhaps analyzing his reactions. He feels a sudden, overwhelming urge to communicate, to understand. He points to the mural depicting the figure standing on the land. That's me, he whispers, his voice hoarse. That's what I did. The sphere emits a series of soft, chiming tones, and the mural depicting the landing craft begins to glow brighter, the image of the figures disembarking becoming more vivid. It's as if the sphere is acknowledging his words, responding to his attempt at connection. Elias remains in the cavern, his mind reeling from the revelations etched into the glowing walls. The sphere continues its soft, melodic hum, a constant companion in the profound silence. He traces the lines of the murals, trying to piece together the narrative, to grasp the scale of what he stumbled upon. He focuses on the later depictions. After the initial construction and observation, the murals show the beings withdrawing, their presence becoming more subtle, more hidden. They seem to be observing from a distance, their technology monitoring the planet. There are images of them interacting with natural phenomena, subtly influencing the Earth's development, but never directly interfering with humanity. One recurring image shows a complex network of energy pathways, radiating from the structure beneath the Earth, spreading across the continent, and eventually connecting to other similar structures dotted around the globe. Elias realizes with a growing sense of awe that he's not just found a tunnel, he's found a node in a global network, a remnant of an ancient, extraterrestrial presence. He looks at the sphere, its iridescent surface reflecting the light of the murals. It seems to be more than just a piece of machinery. It feels like a guardian, a custodian of this place, perhaps even a form of artificial intelligence left behind to maintain and observe. He asks, his voice barely a whisper, what was it for? Why build all of this? The sphere responds with a sequence of tones more complex than before, accompanied by a subtle shift in the luminescence of the murals. A section depicting the structure beneath the Earth begins to glow more intensely. Elias focuses on it. The illuminated veins within the structure are shown pulsing with energy, channeling it upwards, outwards. He then notices a new element in the mural, something he hadn't seen before. It depicts the sphere itself, interacting with the energy flow, directing it, refining it. It seems to be a control mechanism, a sophisticated interface. He tentatively reaches out towards the sphere. It doesn't recoil. Instead, it drifts closer, its articulated arms extending slightly, as if inviting him to touch. He hesitates, then places his hand gently on its cool, smooth surface. A jolt, not of electricity, but of pure information, surges through him. It's not a painful shock, but an overwhelming influx of data. Images, concepts, fragments of knowledge flash through his mind. The vastness of space, the intricate workings of the universe, the subtle energies that govern all life. He sees the purpose of the structures, not just observation, but a form of planetary harmonization, a subtle manipulation of Earth's natural energies to foster growth and stability, to guide its development over eons. He pulls his hand back, gasping. He's been shown. He understands in a way he can't articulate the magnitude of what he's discovered. This isn't just about his barn. It's about the planet, about humanity's place in the cosmos. He looks around the cavern, at the silent, glowing murals, at the hovering sphere. He's no longer just Elias, the rancher struggling to keep his farm afloat. He's Elias, the man who found a tunnel under his barn, the man who glimpsed the universe's hidden history. He knows with a certainty that chills him to the bone that his life and his perception of reality will never be the same. He has entered the tunnel and he has irrevocably come back changed. The question now is, what does he do with this knowledge? The relentless sun beat down on the parched earth, a familiar oppressive force that had defined Silas's life on the ranch. Dust devils danced in the distance, mocking the desperate need for rain. He stood by the barn, the scent of dry hay and old wood a constant companion, a smell that now carried a new, unsettling undertone, the lingering aroma of fear and the metallic tang of blood. The tunnel, that gaping maw beneath his property, had become a physical manifestation of the darkness that had descended upon his world. It was a secret he guarded, a burden that weighed heavier with each passing day. He ran a calloused hand over the rough-hewn timber of the barn door, the splinters a familiar sting. Every creak of the wood, every rustle of wind through the dry grass seemed to amplify the whispers in his mind, the echoes of the desperate struggle, the terrified cries, the sickening thud of impact. He hadn't slept properly since the night it all happened. His dreams were a chaotic swirl of shadows, of faces he couldn't quite make out, of a suffocating darkness that mirrored the blackness of the tunnel. Martha, bless her resilient heart, was doing her best to maintain a semblance of normalcy. She moved through the small ranch house with a quiet grace, her face etched with worry, but her eyes held a spark of unwavering determination. She would bring him coffee, strong and black, her touch a gentle reassurance against his weary soul. "Silas," she'd say, her voice soft but firm, "you can't let this consume you. We have to keep going." He knew she was right, but the going felt more like wading through a bog of despair. He'd spent the last few days reinforcing the entrance to the tunnel, not to keep anyone out, but to keep himself from going back in. The thought of descending into that suffocating darkness again sent a shiver down his spine, a primal fear that had been buried deep within him for years, unearthed by the brutal reality of what lay beneath. He'd used heavy timbers, packed earth, anything to seal it off, to bury the memory, to try and reclaim the peace that had been so violently shattered. But peace felt like a distant mirage. The local sheriff, a man named Brody with eyes that missed nothing, had been by again. He was polite, almost too polite, his questions circling the events of that night like a hawk circling its prey. Silas had given him the same story, a coyote, a struggle, a desperate act of self-defense. Brody hadn't pushed, not directly, but Silas could feel the unspoken questions hanging in the air, the suspicion in his gaze. He knew he was walking a tightrope, and one wrong step could send him tumbling into an abyss of legal scrutiny. The stolen money, the missing men, these were the loose ends that threatened to unravel his carefully constructed narrative. He'd hidden the bulk of it, the blood-soaked bills now a stark reminder of the violence he'd been forced to inflict. He couldn't bring himself to spend it, couldn't bring himself to look at it without feeling a cold dread creep up his spine. It was tainted, a physical embodiment of the night his life irrevocably changed. He walked towards the corral, the familiar silhouette of his horse Buck, a comforting sight. Buck whinnied softly as Silas approached, nudging his hand with a wet muzzle. "Hey, old friend," Silas murmured, scratching the horse's strong neck. "Wish you could tell me what you saw that night." But Buck just blinked his large dark eyes, offering only silent companionship. The vast, open sky stretched out before him, an endless expanse of blue that offered little solace. He felt trapped, not just by the physical limitations of his ranch, but by the invisible chains of his secret. He was a man adrift, haunted by the echoes of a desperate act, his only hope of survival lying in his ability to outrun the shadows that clawed at the edges of his sanity. The tunnel was sealed, but the darkness it represented had seeped into every corner of his life, and he knew, with a chilling certainty, that he would never truly come back the same. He looked towards the setting sun, its fiery descent mirroring the turmoil within him, a stark reminder that night was coming, and with it, the return of the whispers. The days bled into weeks, each one a struggle against the gnawing anxiety that had become Silas's constant companion. The carefully constructed facade of normalcy was wearing thin, and he could feel the strain of maintaining it. He woke before dawn, the chill of the pre-dawn air doing little to awaken him fully. His mind was a battlefield, replaying the events of that night with an agonizing clarity, each detail etched into his memory with the sharpness of a branding iron. He forced himself through the motions of ranch life, feeding the livestock, mending fences, checking on the water troughs. But his hands moved with a mechanical efficiency, his thoughts miles away. Martha tried to engage him, sharing snippets of news from town, asking about the progress of the fences, her voice a gentle attempt to pull him back to the present. He offered clipped responses, his gaze often fixed on the horizon, as if searching for an escape that didn't exist. "Silas," she said one evening, her voice laced with a concern that cut him deeper than any accusation, "you're not eating, you're not sleeping, you're fading away." She placed a hand on his arm, her touch warm and steady. "Whatever happened in that tunnel, you can't carry it alone. We have to talk about it." He flinched, pulling away as if her touch had burned him. "There's nothing to talk about, Martha," he said, his voice rough. "It's done. It's over." But the words felt hollow, a desperate lie he was trying to convince himself of. The tunnel was sealed, but the memories were like a relentless tide washing over him, threatening to drown him. He found himself drawn to the barn, not to the entrance of the tunnel, but to the familiar scent of hay and the sturdy, dependable presence of the structure itself. He'd spend hours there, running his hands over the worn tools, the sacks of feed, anything that anchored him to the tangible world. He'd even started cleaning it more meticulously than usual, a frantic attempt to scrub away the lingering scent of fear, the phantom smell of blood that seemed to cling to the very air. One afternoon, while organizing a forgotten corner of the barn, his hand brushed against a loose floorboard. Curiosity, a dangerous flicker in his weary mind, prompted him to pry it open. Beneath it lay a small, leather-bound journal. It belonged to his father, a man he'd lost years ago, a man who had built this ranch with his own 2 hands. He'd never known his father to keep a journal, and a strange sense of reverence mixed with trepidation filled him as he opened it. The entries were sparse at first, detailing the daily struggles of ranch life, the hopes and dreams of a simpler time. But as he read further, a different narrative began to emerge. His father wrote of hidden debts, of desperate measures taken to keep the ranch afloat, of secrets buried deep within the land itself. One entry, dated nearly 20 years prior, sent a jolt of ice through Silas's veins. The whispers beneath the barn are growing louder. I fear what I have disturbed. I have sealed it for now, but the darkness, it waits. Silas's breath hitched. The whispers, the darkness. His father had known. He had found the tunnel too, and he had sealed it. But unlike Silas, he had left behind a record, a testament to his own struggle. The realization was both terrifying and strangely comforting. He wasn't alone in this. His father had faced this same nightmare, had grappled with the same darkness. But his father had also kept it hidden, a secret passed down through generations, buried beneath the very earth they lived on. He continued to read, his heart pounding in his chest. His father's later entries spoke of an uneasy peace, of learning to live with the secret, of a quiet vigilance. But there was also a sense of resignation, a feeling that the darkness was an ever-present threat, waiting for its moment. Silas closed the journal, the worn leather cool against his trembling fingers. The weight of his father's secret, now added to his own, felt almost unbearable. He looked towards the barn door, the sealed entrance to the tunnel, a silent, ominous presence. He understood now. This wasn't just his burden. It was a legacy of darkness, a secret that had shaped his family's past and now threatened to consume his future. He realized he had to do more than just seal the tunnel. He had to understand what his father had faced, what truly lay beneath his barn before it consumed them all. The old journal, clutched in Silas's hand, felt like a talisman, a key to a past he had never fully understood. The words written by his father were a chilling confirmation of his own fears, a spectral hand reaching out from the grave to guide him, or perhaps to warn him. He spent the rest of the day poring over the journal, tracing the faded ink, trying to decipher the unspoken anxieties that lay between the lines. His father's struggle mirrored his own, a grim dance with a hidden malevolence. He learned that his father had discovered the tunnel under similar circumstances, a desperate search for lost livestock, a misplaced step, a descent into the unknown. The journal spoke of unsettling sounds, of a palpable sense of dread, and of a primal urge to escape the suffocating blackness. The whispers his father mentioned were not auditory hallucinations, but a subjective experience of overwhelming unease, a feeling of being watched, of an ancient presence stirred from its slumber. His father's solution had been drastic, to seal the entrance with heavy timbers and earth, not just to hide it, but to contain whatever lurked within. He had meticulously documented his efforts, detailing the precise measurements, the types of wood used, the layers of soil packed down. It was a painstaking process, born out of a desperate need for security. Silas realized that his own hasty sealing of the tunnel, while effective in the short term, was a pale imitation of his father's thoroughness. He must have been terrified, Silas murmured, running a thumb over a drawing of the tunnel's rough-hewn entrance. He felt a pang of guilt for not understanding his father's silent struggles, for the years of unspoken burdens. His father had carried this secret alone, a weight that must have shaped his quiet, reserved demeanor. Martha found him in the barn, his face illuminated by the flickering light of a lantern. She sat beside him, her presence a quiet comfort. He hesitated for a moment, then began to read passages from the journal aloud. He watched her face as he spoke, saw the dawning realization, the widening of her eyes, the tremor in her lips. She didn't interrupt, her silence a testament to her empathy. When he finished, the only sound was the chirping of crickets outside. Martha reached out, her hand finding his. "He was protecting you," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Protecting all of us." "But what was it, Martha?" Silas asked, his voice a raw whisper. "What was he so afraid of?" Martha shook her head, her gaze fixed on the journal. "He didn't say, did he? Just the darkness. It sounds like something ancient, something that shouldn't have been disturbed." The idea of an ancient, undisturbed presence resonated with Silas. It explained the profound sense of wrongness he'd felt, the primal fear that had gripped him. It wasn't just a hole in the ground, it was a breach into something forgotten, something that preferred to remain buried. He decided he needed to investigate further, not by going back into the tunnel, but by understanding the history of the land. His father's journal mentioned geological surveys, old land deeds, and local legends. He resolved to visit the county archives to dig into the history of their property, to see if there were any clues about what might have existed there before the ranch. The next morning, he rode into town, the journal tucked carefully into his saddlebag. The familiar dusty street seemed different now, imbued with a hidden history. He felt a strange sense of responsibility, a duty to uncover the truth, not just for his own peace of mind, but to honor his father's legacy and to protect Martha. The weight of the secret had shifted. It was no longer just his personal trauma. It was a shared inheritance, a mystery that demanded to be solved before it claimed another generation. He entered the imposing stone building of the county courthouse, the scent of aged paper and leather filling his nostrils, a scent that promised answers, and perhaps more questions. The county archives were a labyrinth of dimly lit shelves, each one groaning under the weight of forgotten histories. The air was thick with the scent of aging paper and the hushed reverence of a place where time itself seemed to stand still. Silas felt a sense of awe, mingled with a growing impatience. He was on a mission, and every moment spent sifting through dusty documents felt like a precious hour, stolen from the encroaching darkness. He started with the land deeds, tracing the ownership of his property back through the generations. He found records of initial purchases, homesteading claims, and subsequent sales. His family had owned this land for nearly a century, a significant stretch of time, yet nothing in the early records hinted at anything unusual. It was the usual patchwork of agricultural endeavors, land disputes, and the slow expansion of settlement in the territory. Then he stumbled upon a series of old survey maps from the late 19th century, commissioned by a speculative land company that had once tried to establish a significant settlement in the region. These maps were more detailed, showing not just property lines, but also geological formations, and even some speculative notations about unusual subterranean anomalies. One particular map, hand-drawn with meticulous detail, marked an area on what would become his property with a peculiar symbol, a stylized, slightly jagged spiral. Below it, a faint annotation read, "Potential sinkhole or undiscovered cavern. Caution advised." Silas's heart quickened. This was the first tangible evidence, beyond his father's journal, that something unusual lay beneath the surface. He cross-referenced the map with current property lines, and his blood ran cold. The spiral symbol was located precisely where his barn stood, where the tunnel had been. He moved on to local historical records, searching for any mention of unusual events, disappearances, or strange occurrences in the area during the late 1800s. He found scattered accounts of settlers who had vanished without a trace, of livestock found dead under mysterious circumstances, of eerie lights seen in the desolate hills. Most of these were dismissed as folklore or the inevitable hardships of frontier life, but together they painted a disturbing picture. One newspaper clipping from 1888, brittle and yellowed, caught his eye. It reported on the abrupt abandonment of a small mining camp on the outskirts of his property. The article was brief, citing unforeseen geological instability and a pervasive sense of unease among the workers. It mentioned that several men had refused to return to the mine after a cave-in, claiming the earth itself seemed to be breathing. Breathing. The word echoed in Silas's mind, a chilling parallel to his father's whispers. He felt a knot of apprehension tighten in his stomach. This wasn't just a geological oddity. It was something that seemed to actively repel human presence, something that instilled a deep-seated fear. He also found anecdotal accounts, passed down through local families and recorded in a dusty volume of oral histories. One story, recounted by a descendant of a homesteader from the 1870s, spoke of a hollow place in the earth, a place where the ground would sometimes hum, and where strange shadows seemed to writhe just beyond the edge of vision. The elder had warned his children to steer clear, calling it a cursed spot. Silas spent hours in the archives, the afternoon sun slanting through the high windows, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with the ghosts of the past. He meticulously copied down all relevant information, his hand cramping from the effort. He felt a growing sense of urgency. The more he learned, the more he realized the danger wasn't just a figment of his imagination or a consequence of his own actions. It was something inherent to the land itself, something that had been there long before his family, and perhaps long before any human settlement. As he packed up his notes, a particular passage from the oral history book stood out. It spoke of an old Native American legend, passed down through generations, about a place where the earth bled darkness and where ancient spirits slumbered, disturbed by the arrogance of men. The legend cautioned against disturbing this place, lest the darkness seep out and consume those who dared. Silas left the archives with a heavy heart and a mind buzzing with 1,000 questions. He had found evidence, a historical context for the unsettling nature of the land beneath his barn. But the truth remained elusive, shrouded in the mists of time and folklore. He knew one thing for certain. The tunnel was not merely a hole, it was a gateway, and he had inadvertently reopened it. The weight of his father's secret now felt like a shared responsibility, and he knew he had to find a way to truly understand and contain this ancient darkness before it was too late. The dusty records of the county archives had provided Silas with historical context, a chilling narrative woven into the very fabric of the land, but they offered no concrete explanation, no scientific reason for the unease that permeated the area around the tunnel. The old maps and legends hinted at something ancient and potentially dangerous, but the nature of that danger remained shrouded in mystery. Back on the ranch, the days continued their relentless march. Silas found himself increasingly vigilant, his senses on high alert. Every creak of the barn, every rustle of the wind through the dry grass, sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He felt as though he were being watched, a constant, invisible presence lurking just beyond his peripheral vision. He started making deliberate trips around the perimeter of his property, his eyes scanning the landscape with a newfound intensity. He noticed subtle things he'd overlooked before, patches of unusually dry earth, the unnerving silence of the birds in certain areas, the way the shadows seemed to linger longer under the old oak trees. These were not overt signs of danger, but they contributed to the pervasive sense of unease that had settled over the ranch like a shroud. One evening, as dusk began to paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, Silas was out by the barn, checking on the horses. Buck, usually a placid creature, seemed agitated, his ears swiveling nervously, his gaze fixed on the ground near the sealed entrance of the tunnel. Silas followed Buck's line of sight, his heart pounding in his chest. For a fleeting moment, he thought he saw a flicker of movement, a disturbance in the dust that wasn't caused by the wind. He cautiously approached the area, his hand instinctively reaching for the sturdy, albeit empty holster at his hip. The dust settled, revealing nothing out of the ordinary. Yet, the feeling of being observed intensified. It was a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, a cold awareness that he was not alone. He remembered his father's journal entry. The whispers. They are not just in my mind. I feel them. I see their effect. Silas began to wonder if the whispers were more than just a feeling. Could there be something or someone observing him, drawn by the disturbance he had inadvertently caused? He confided in Martha, speaking in hushed tones about the feeling of being watched. She listened patiently, her brow furrowed with concern. "Silas," she said gently, "it's understandable that you're on edge. What you went through, it would shake anyone. Perhaps it's just your mind playing tricks on you, amplified by the stress." He wanted to believe her, but the feeling was too persistent, too real. It wasn't just a vague sense of unease, it was a tangible awareness of an unseen presence. He started to pay closer attention to his surroundings, to the subtle shifts in the environment. He noticed that when he was near the barn, the air seemed to grow colder, and the sounds of the ranch seemed to mute. One afternoon, while tending to a broken water pump some distance from the house, Silas heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible scraping sound coming from the direction of the barn. It was a dry, rasping noise, like something being dragged across rough stone. He froze, straining to hear. The sound repeated, a slow, deliberate rhythm. He moved silently, cautiously, towards the barn, his senses heightened. The scraping stopped as he neared the structure. He circled the perimeter, peering through the gaps in the wooden slats. Nothing, yet the feeling of an unseen observer was stronger than ever. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. He remembered the old prospectors' tales from the archives, the ones about strange lights and unsettling phenomena. Were these just exaggerated stories, or was there a kernel of truth to them? Was someone or something actively monitoring his attempts to contain the darkness? That night, Silas barely slept. He lay in bed listening to the silence of the ranch, a silence that felt pregnant with unseen threats. He thought about the money he had hidden, the money that had led to the violence in the first place. Had the men who had threatened him or others like them discovered the tunnel before him? Or was this something else entirely, something older, something tied to the very earth. The realization dawned on him with a chilling certainty. He was not just dealing with the aftermath of a violent encounter. He was entangled in something far older, far more complex, and potentially far more dangerous. The feeling of being watched was not paranoia. It was a warning. He needed to understand what was observing him and why, before whatever lurked in the shadows decided to make its presence known in a more direct and terrifying way. The feeling of being watched, coupled with the inexplicable sounds and chilling phenomena, gnawed at Silas's peace of mind. He couldn't shake the sensation that someone or something was observing him, an unseen audience to his struggle. He started to leave the lantern burning longer into the night, its flickering light a small comfort against the encroaching darkness. One morning, while inspecting the outer fencing near the barn, Silas noticed something peculiar. A series of faint tracks, unlike any animal he recognized, pressed into the dry earth. They were elongated, almost human-like, but with an unnatural gait, suggested by their spacing and depth. They led from the dense thicket bordering the property towards the barn, and then, disturbingly, seemed to vanish near the reinforced entrance of the tunnel. His heart hammered against his ribs. These weren't the tracks of a coyote or a deer. They were something else. He knelt, tracing the impressions with a trembling finger. The earth around the tracks felt strangely disturbed, as if something had been recently unearthed or deliberately concealed. He followed the faint trail, his eyes darting around, a growing sense of dread coiling in his gut. The tracks led him to a small overgrown area behind the barn, a place he rarely frequented. Pushing aside a tangle of dry brush, he uncovered a shallow, recently dug pit. Inside the pit, nestled amongst loose soil and rocks, was a collection of rusted metal objects. They looked like fragments of old tools, twisted and corroded, but also something else, what appeared to be shards of what looked like a very old, crude weapon, perhaps a spearhead or an axe head, made of a dark, unfamiliar metal. Beneath these fragments he found a small leather pouch, its material long since decayed, leaving behind only a scattering of dark, powdery residue. He carefully picked up one of the metal shards. It was surprisingly heavy, with an unusual texture that felt almost greasy to the touch. He tried to scratch it with his thumbnail, but it resisted, harder than any iron he knew. As he examined the pit, Silas felt a profound sense of unease. This wasn't the work of a casual passerby. The deliberate digging, the strange artifacts, it suggested someone or something was actively searching, or perhaps hiding something. And the location so close to the tunnel, it couldn't be a coincidence. He carefully reburied the pit, marking its location mentally. He felt a growing conviction that these discoveries were directly linked to the tunnel, to the darkness his father had spoken of. Were these remnants of some ancient inhabitants of the land, disturbed by the tunnel's reopening? Or were they left by someone who knew about the tunnel and was attempting to access or retrieve something from it? That evening he discussed his findings with Martha. He described the tracks, the pit, the strange metal fragments. Her face grew pale as she listened. "Silas, this sounds unsettling. Could someone be trying to break into the tunnel?" "I don't know," Silas admitted, his voice grim. "But whatever it is, it's connected. Those tracks, that pit, it's like someone was digging for something. Or maybe they left something there." He couldn't shake the image of the dark, heavy metal. It felt alien, ancient, unlike anything he had ever encountered. He remembered the local legend of the hollow place where the earth bled darkness. Could these artifacts be related to that? The next day, Silas decided to revisit the archives, this time with a specific purpose. He needed to find any mention of ancient inhabitants, of unusual geological findings, or of any historical accounts of strange metal artifacts being discovered in the region. He spent hours poring over books on Native American history and archaeology, his frustration mounting as he found little that directly matched his discovery. However, he did find a reference to a local Native American tribe, long since vanished, known for their unique metalworking techniques, using a rare dark ore found in deep subterranean deposits. The tribe was said to have held certain areas of the land sacred, believing them to be places of immense spiritual power, guarded by ancient entities. The text also mentioned that the tribe had a tradition of leaving protective totems or markers near these sacred sites. Silas returned to the ranch with a dawning realization. The artifacts he found might be remnants of such markers, or perhaps offerings left by those who revered or feared the place. The tracks, the pit, the objects, they were all pieces of a puzzle that pointed towards a history far deeper and more mysterious than he had imagined. He was no longer just dealing with the consequences of a crime. He was stepping into a territory of ancient secrets and unspoken warnings. The darkness beneath his barn was not just a hole in the ground, it was a doorway to a forgotten past, and he was beginning to suspect that something from that past was now actively reaching out. The unease that had settled over Silas had now solidified into a palpable fear. The evidence was mounting: the strange tracks, the disturbed earth, the unsettling artifacts. Someone, or something, had been on his land, investigating the area around the tunnel. He knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. He decided to set up a crude but effective watch. Using some old lumber and tarps, he constructed a makeshift blind on a small rise overlooking the barn, giving him a clear, albeit concealed view of the entire area. He would take turns with Martha, keeping vigil through the night, their fatigue battling with the adrenaline that coursed through their veins. The first few nights were uneventful, filled only with the familiar sounds of the ranch and the rustling of nocturnal animals. The silence was almost more unnerving than any noise, a pregnant pause that seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Silas found himself staring at the reinforced entrance of the tunnel, his mind conjuring images of what might lie beneath and what might be trying to get out. On the third night, as the moon cast long, eerie shadows across the landscape, Silas saw it, a figure, silhouetted against the dim moonlight, moving with an unnerving fluidity towards the barn. The figure was cloaked, its form indistinct, but its movements were deliberate, almost stealthy. It moved with a strange gait, reminiscent of the tracks Silas had found. Silas's heart leapt into his throat. This was no ordinary trespasser. There was a strange stillness about the figure, an unnatural grace that sent a shiver down his spine. He nudged Martha awake, his hand trembling as he pointed towards the barn. She followed his gaze, her breath catching in her throat. They watched in silent horror as the figure reached the barn. It moved with an uncanny knowledge of the structure, navigating the shadows with ease. It seemed to pause for a moment near the reinforced entrance of the tunnel, its head tilted as if listening, or perhaps sensing. Then, with a surprising agility, it scaled a section of the barn wall, disappearing onto the roof. Silas felt a cold dread wash over him. This wasn't just someone trying to steal something. This felt like an intrusion, a violation of a deeper kind. The figure moved with a purpose, a focus that spoke of more than simple larceny. They waited, their muscles tensed, for what felt like an eternity. The figure reappeared on the roof, moving with the same unhurried grace, and then descended back to the ground, disappearing into the shadows at the edge of the property, moving away from the barn, back into the desolate landscape. "What was that?" Martha whispered, her voice barely audible. Silas shook his head, his mind reeling. "I don't know, but it wasn't human, not entirely." He remembered the legends of the ancient tribe, the stories of their connection to the land, and the warnings about disturbing sacred places. Could this figure be connected to that? A guardian, perhaps, or something else, something drawn by the disturbance. He checked the area near the tunnel entrance after the figure had gone. There were no new tracks, no signs of tampering. It was as if the figure had moved through the space without leaving a trace, except for the unsettling memory it had imprinted on their minds. The encounter left Silas shaken. He felt a primal fear he hadn't experienced even during the violent confrontation. This was a different kind of threat, one that was elusive, mysterious, and deeply unnerving. The trespasser had confirmed his deepest fears. The tunnel was not just a secret he was hiding. It was a focal point for something ancient and perhaps dangerous. He realized that his attempts to simply seal the tunnel were insufficient. He needed to understand what was drawing this presence, what ancient forces he had awakened. The artifacts, the legends, the trespasser, they were all pieces of a larger, more ominous puzzle. He knew that sleep would be difficult that night, and that the vigil would continue. He had to be prepared for whatever or whoever decided to trespass again. The darkness was no longer just beneath his barn. It was actively reaching out, and he was caught in its unsettling embrace. The encounter with the cloaked figure had shattered any lingering illusions of safety. Silas and Martha maintained their vigil, their fatigue battling with a heightened sense of awareness. Every rustle of leaves, every distant hoot of an owl sent a jolt of alarm through them. The ranch, once a symbol of peace and hard-won prosperity, now felt like a battleground, the enemy unseen, its intentions unknown. Silas spent his days poring over the old documents from the archives, his focus now shifting to anything that might shed light on the local Native American legends. He found more detailed accounts of the tribe that had once inhabited the region, their deep reverence for the land, and their belief in powerful subterranean spirits. One particular legend spoke of a guardian of the deep, a spectral entity that protected sacred underground places and would manifest itself to those who disturbed them. The legend described the guardian as a being of shadow and mist, capable of moving with unnatural speed and silence. The description sent a chill down Silas's spine. It eerily matched the figure they had seen. Was this what his father had feared? The darkness his journal spoke of, was it a sentient entity, a guardian awakened by the disruption? The wind, which had been relatively still for days, began to pick up, a low, mournful howl that seemed to weave through the dry landscape. It carried with it a strange, almost ethereal quality, at times sounding like a chorus of faint whispers, just at the edge of audibility. Silas found himself straining to hear, trying to decipher words from the wind's lament. He remembered the phrase from the oral histories, "The earth bled darkness." He wondered if the wind itself was carrying echoes of whatever lay beneath the tunnel, a form of communication, or perhaps a warning. One afternoon, while tending to the livestock near the far pasture, Silas experienced something new. A sudden, intense wave of dizziness washed over him, accompanied by a profound sense of disorientation. The world seemed to spin, the familiar landscape blurring before his eyes. He felt an overwhelming urge to lie down, to surrender to the strange lethargy that was creeping over him. He stumbled, catching himself on a fence post. He looked around, expecting to see Martha, but she was nowhere in sight. He was alone, and for a moment the world felt alien and hostile. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the sensation receded, leaving him weak and trembling, but with a clear head. He rushed back to the house, his mind racing. This was not just stress or fatigue. This was something external, something that was affecting him physically. He recounted the experience to Martha, his voice strained. "It was like something was trying to pull me under," he explained. "Like a fog was descending on my mind." Martha's face was etched with worry. "Silas, this is too much. We need to get help. We need to tell Sheriff Brody everything." Silas hesitated. He knew telling Brody would mean revealing the tunnel, the money, the struggle. It would open up a legal quagmire he wasn't sure he could navigate. But the escalating strangeness, the physical effects, the persistent feeling of being watched, it was all becoming too much to bear alone. That night, the wind seemed to carry more than just whispers. Silas heard distinct sounds emanating from the direction of the barn, a low resonant hum, and a series of sharp metallic clangs like tools being struck against rock. It was the sound of activity, of someone or something working, or perhaps trying to break through. He and Martha grabbed their rifles, their hearts pounding in unison. They moved cautiously towards the barn, the wind whipping around them, carrying an almost palpable sense of dread. They peered through the gaps in the barn wall, their eyes straining in the darkness. And then they saw it. Not the cloaked figure this time, but something far more disturbing. The reinforced entrance to the tunnel was slightly ajar. A dark viscous substance, like thick black oil, was slowly oozing from the gap, pooling on the barn floor. The air around it was heavy, cold, and carried a faint metallic scent that was deeply unsettling. The low hum seemed to emanate from the tunnel itself, a resonant thrum that vibrated through the very ground beneath their feet. Silas's blood ran cold. Whatever his father had sealed, whatever had been disturbed, was not contained. The darkness was seeping out, a tangible, physical manifestation of the ancient threat. He knew then that sealing the tunnel was no longer enough. He had to confront it, to understand its nature, before it consumed them all. The whispering wind was no longer a metaphor. It was a harbinger of the encroaching darkness. The sight of the viscous black substance seeping from the tunnel entrance sent a wave of primal fear through Silas. It wasn't just a hypothetical threat anymore. It was a tangible, physical manifestation of the ancient danger his father had warned of, the darkness he had so desperately tried to contain. The air in the barn was heavy, frigid, and thick with a peculiar metallic odor that made Silas's stomach churn. The low, resonant hum emanating from the gap vibrated through the soles of his boots, a disturbing pulse that seemed to speak of something ancient and malevolent stirring from its slumber. Martha stood beside him, her rifle held steady but her eyes wide with a terror that mirrored his own. "Silas, what is that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rising wind. "I don't know," Silas admitted, his own voice strained. "But it's not good. It's coming out." He remembered the legends from the archives, the warnings of the earth-bleeding darkness. This was it. This was the ancient malevolence made manifest. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that they couldn't just reseal the gap. Whatever this substance was, it was more than just dirt or fluid. It felt alive, potent, and deeply wrong. The sheer presence of it was oppressive, a suffocating weight that seemed to drain the very life from the air. "We have to do something," Martha said, her gaze fixed on the oozing darkness. "We can't just let it spread." Silas nodded, his mind racing. He thought of his father's journal, the meticulous notes on sealing the tunnel. His father had used heavy timbers, packed earth, anything to create a barrier, but this substance, it seemed to ooze through solid matter, defying conventional containment. He remembered the strange metal fragments he had found near the pit. They were made of a dark, unidentifiable ore, incredibly dense and resistant to scratching. He had dismissed them as artifacts, relics of a lost past. But now, looking at the unnatural fluidity of the black substance, a wild, desperate idea began to form in his mind. Could these fragments, this strange metal, hold a key to containing it? "The metal," Silas said, his voice suddenly urgent. "The fragments I found. My father mentioned using different materials to reinforce the deeper parts of the tunnel. Maybe this metal is resistant to whatever this is." It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was the only idea they had. Silas knew he had to retrieve those fragments and find a way to use them to seal the gap, but the thought of getting close to that oozing darkness made his skin crawl. He looked at Martha. "I need to go back to where I found those fragments. You stay here, keep watch. If anything happens, if that figure returns, you have to get out, Martha. Get to town, tell them what's happening." Martha shook her head vehemently. "No, I'm not leaving you. We're in this together." Her resolve was unwavering, a beacon of strength in the encroaching despair. Silas knew he couldn't argue. Together, they cautiously approached the pit where he had found the metal fragments. The wind howled around them, carrying with it what sounded like faint, sibilant whispers, as if the very air was trying to dissuade them. Silas dug frantically, unearthing the rusted tools and the shards of dark metal. He gathered as many of the metallic fragments as he could, stuffing them into his pockets and a nearby burlap sack. Returning to the barn, they faced the oozing darkness. It had spread further, a creeping stain on the wooden floor, its metallic scent now overpowering. Silas felt a nauseating wave of dizziness wash over him, the hum intensifying, pressing in on his senses. He knew they had to act quickly. Using the heavy timbers his father had used, they began to wedge them into the gap, trying to slow the flow. But the black substance oozed around them, finding new pathways. Then, Silas began to press the dark metal fragments into the gaps, stuffing them into the spaces between the timbers, trying to create a barrier of the strange, unyielding material. As Silas worked, he felt a strange sensation. The metal fragments seemed to react to the black substance, emitting a faint, low-frequency vibration. The oozing slowed, then seemed to congeal around the metal, as if repelled by it. The hum from the tunnel lessened, and the oppressive cold in the barn began to recede slightly. It wasn't a complete seal, not yet, but it was a start. The flow had been significantly reduced, the darkness held at bay, for now. Silas leaned against a timber, his body aching, his mind reeling. He had managed to temporarily contain the immediate threat, using an ancient material that seemed to be the antithesis of the darkness itself. But he knew this was just a reprieve. The tunnel was still there, the source of the darkness remained, and the unsettling feeling of being watched had not entirely dissipated. He looked at Martha, her face streaked with dirt and fear, but her eyes held a flicker of grim determination. They had faced the immediate danger, but the true battle, the battle against the ancient secret of the tunnel, had only just begun. The weight of this new understanding, of the true nature of the threat, settled upon him, heavier than ever before. The sun beat down relentlessly on the dusty plains, mirroring the heat of the internal conflict raging within Jedediah. He stood at the entrance of the tunnel, the rough-hewn wood of the barn door a stark contrast to the smooth, cool darkness that beckoned him. For weeks, the tunnel had been a silent, brooding presence, a secret he'd wrestled with daily. It represented a past he couldn't outrun, and a future he wasn't sure he could face. His hands, calloused from years of farm work, trembled slightly as he pushed the heavy door open further. The air that wafted out was damp and carried the scent of earth, a primal smell that stirred something deep within him. He thought of Sarah, her unwavering faith in him, her quiet strength. He thought of the years they'd built this life, brick by painstaking brick, sweat and dreams woven into the very fabric of their homestead. He thought of the fear that had gripped him, the fear of what lay beneath, the fear of what it might mean for them. But the fear of stagnation, of letting this secret fester and poison their present, had finally won. He couldn't live with the what-ifs any longer. He needed to know. He needed to confront whatever lay at the end of this earthen moor. He grabbed his lantern, its oil freshly topped up, and the sturdy shovel that had become an extension of his arm. Taking a deep breath, he stepped across the threshold, the wooden door groaning shut behind him, plunging him into an inky blackness broken only by the flickering glow of his lantern. The descent was steep, the earth giving way to rough-hewn steps that seemed to have been carved by hands long gone. Each step echoed in the confined space, amplifying his solitude. The air grew cooler, heavier, and the scent of damp earth intensified. He could hear the faint trickle of water somewhere in the distance, a lonely sound in the oppressive silence. He paused, listening, his heart thrumming a nervous rhythm against his ribs. He imagined eyes watching him from the shadows, though he knew rationally that it was just his mind playing tricks. As he ventured deeper, the tunnel widened. The walls, slick with moisture, glistened in the lamplight, revealing veins of minerals he didn't recognize. He ran a hand over the cool, damp surface, a strange sense of awe mixing with his apprehension. This was no natural formation. Someone had dug this, painstakingly, deliberately. But who and why? The questions swirled in his mind, each one a tiny eddy pulling him further into the mystery. He thought of the stories his grandfather used to tell, tales of hidden caches, of old mining operations long abandoned. Could this be connected? Or was it something else entirely? Something more personal, something tied to the land itself? He pressed on, his boots crunching on loose gravel. The lantern cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and contort, playing tricks on his eyes. He held the light steady, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. His lantern light swept across the space, revealing a sight that made him stop, dead in his tracks. It wasn't a treasure trove nor a forgotten mine. It was something far more intentional. Arranged with deliberate care were crates, old and weathered, stacked neatly against one wall. And in the center of the chamber, a simple wooden table and chair. It was as if someone had set up a hidden room, a clandestine meeting place. His heart pounded. This was no accident. This was a deliberate construction, a secret, deliberately hidden. He approached the table cautiously, his shovel held ready. He ran his fingers over the rough wood, feeling the grain, the age. Who had been here? What had they done here? He looked around the chamber, his eyes scanning every nook and cranny. And then he saw it, tucked away in a shadowed corner. A small, leather-bound journal. His breath hitched. This was it. The answers, he hoped, were within his grasp. He reached for the journal, his fingers brushing against the cool, aged leather. This was the moment of truth. He had found his tunnel, and he was about to discover what lay at its end. Jedediah's hands, still coated in the fine dust of the tunnel, trembled as he picked up the leather-bound journal. It felt strangely heavy, not just in weight, but in the burden of secrets it likely held. He carried it back to the table, the flickering lamplight casting an eerie glow on the aged pages. The room felt charged with a palpable sense of history, of lives lived and intentions, perhaps nefarious, carried out in this hidden space. He opened the journal to the first page, his eyes scanning the faded, spidery handwriting. It was a name and a date from decades ago. Silas Blackwood, he read aloud, his voice a low murmur in the stillness. October 14th, 1888. A chill that had nothing to do with the tunnel's temperature snaked down his spine. This was not just an old hideout. It was a place of deliberate concealment, a sanctuary for something Silas Blackwood deemed important enough to bury. He flipped through the pages, his gaze falling on entries that spoke of clandestine meetings, of hushed transactions, of goods being stored and moved under the cloak of darkness. The entries were cryptic, hinting at a network, a system of smuggling that operated far from the prying eyes of the law. He saw references to shipments, to routes, to names he didn't recognize, but that clearly held significance for Blackwood. The crates in the chamber suddenly took on a more sinister meaning. They were not just stored, they were hidden. Jedediah's mind raced. He thought of the stories of Silas Blackwood that still circulated in hushed tones around town. Tales of a man who'd amassed a fortune through questionable means, a man who'd vanished without a trace, leaving behind rumors of stolen gold and buried secrets. He'd always dismissed them as folklore, exaggerated tales from a bygone era. Now, standing in Blackwood's hidden sanctuary, he knew the truth was far more tangible and far more dangerous. He continued to read, piecing together fragments of Blackwood's life, his ambition, his paranoia. The journal detailed his fear of betrayal, his meticulous planning to ensure his operations remained secret. He wrote of needing a secure place, a place no one would ever think to look. And then Jedediah found it, an entry that sent a jolt of recognition through him. The old barn on the ridge, Blackwood had written. A foolish farmer built it years ago, never knowing its true potential. I've expanded beneath it, a safe place to conduct my business. None will ever find it, for who would look beneath a farmer's humble abode? Jedediah's breath hitched. The barn, his barn, the one his grandfather had built, the one he'd inherited. This wasn't just a tunnel he'd stumbled upon. It was a deliberate hidden legacy of crime and deceit buried beneath his very home. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him. The land he'd worked, the life he'd built, was founded in part on this hidden foundation of illicit activity. He reread the entries, a dawning realization spreading through him. Blackwood hadn't just vanished. He'd likely been betrayed or had simply moved on, leaving his hidden operations dormant. But the tunnel, the chamber, remained. Jedediah closed the journal, his mind reeling. What was he supposed to do with this knowledge? To expose it meant implicating himself, his farm, his family in a scandal that had been buried for decades. To keep it secret meant becoming complicit, living a lie, the darkness of Blackwood's actions festering beneath his own roof. He looked at the crates again, his eyes narrowing. What exactly had Silas Blackwood been smuggling? The journal offered no concrete answers, only veiled hints and coded language. He knew he couldn't leave it like this. He had to understand the full extent of what lay hidden. He picked up his shovel, the weight of it suddenly feeling immense. He had to excavate not just Blackwood's secrets, but his own complicity. He had entered the tunnel seeking answers, and he had found them. But they were answers that promised to change everything, forcing him to confront not just a ghost from the past, but the very foundation of his present. The tunnel had indeed changed him, and now he had to decide what kind of man he would be in the light of this unearthed truth. The air in the hidden chamber felt thick with unspoken questions. Jedediah stood for a long moment, the journal clutched in one hand, the shovel in the other. Silas Blackwood's words echoed in his mind, a chilling testament to a life built on deception. He looked at the crates, their weathered wood a silent testament to the illicit cargo they had once contained. The weight of his discovery pressed down on him, heavier than any earthly burden. He thought of Sarah, her open face, her unwavering trust. Could he continue to live this lie, even if it was an inherited one? Could he look her in the eye, knowing what lay beneath their feet? His gaze fell on a loose section of the wall behind where the crates were stacked. It wasn't like the rest of the tunnel, smoother, almost deliberately concealed. Driven by a newfound urgency, he moved the crates aside, revealing a small iron-bound chest. It was locked, but the lock was old, rusted, and brittle. With a few sharp raps of his shovel, it sprang open. Inside, nestled on faded velvet lining, were not glittering jewels or stacks of gold coins, but documents. Old deeds, ledgers, and most importantly, letters. He carefully lifted out a bundle, tied with a faded ribbon. The handwriting on the top letter was familiar, yet decades younger. It was from his own grandfather, written to Silas Blackwood. His heart pounded as he read. The letters revealed a complex and ultimately tragic relationship. Silas Blackwood, it turned out, wasn't just a smuggler. He had been Jedediah's grandfather's business partner, a partner whose ambition and ruthlessness had threatened to ruin them both. The tunnel, the hidden chamber, had been their desperate attempt to stash assets, to protect what they could from creditors and a collapsing enterprise. But Blackwood, as Jedediah had suspected, had ultimately double-crossed his grandfather, vanishing with the lion's share of their combined wealth, leaving Jedediah's grandfather with nothing but debt and ruin. The journal had painted Blackwood as the sole villain, but these letters revealed a more nuanced, heartbreaking truth. Jedediah's grandfather had been a victim, but also, in his desperation, had made choices that had led him down a dangerous path. The smuggling had been an attempt to salvage their legitimate business, a business that had been undermined by Blackwood's greed. Tears welled in Jedediah's eyes as he read his grandfather's anguished words, his regret, his shame. He understood now. The tunnel wasn't just a criminal's hideout. It was a monument to a failed partnership, to broken trust, and to the devastating consequences of ambition unchecked. His grandfather had never spoken of Blackwood, never revealed the full extent of their dealings, likely out of shame and a desire to protect his family from the stain of their association. He carefully placed the letters back in the chest, his hands now steady. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't let this hidden history continue to dictate his present. He couldn't let Blackwood's legacy, however buried, continue to cast a shadow. He picked up the journal, his gaze hardening with resolve. He would not sell the land. He would not exploit the tunnel. Instead, he would bring the truth to light, not in a way that would bring shame, but in a way that would honor his grandfather's struggle and reclaim his family's legacy. He would use the information in the documents, not to pursue revenge, but to understand the full scope of his grandfather's business dealings, to clear his name, and to rebuild their reputation on honest ground. He carefully placed the journal and the letters back into the iron chest, and then, with a heavy but determined heart, he began to restack the crates. He wouldn't seal the tunnel, not entirely. He would leave it as a reminder, a testament to the past, but he would ensure that its secrets no longer held power over his future. He would emerge from this tunnel a different man, one who understood the complexities of his heritage, the weight of his choices, and the unwavering strength of family and truth. As he ascended the rough-hewn steps, the lantern's glow seemed brighter, illuminating not just the path ahead, but the newfound clarity in his own soul. He pushed open the heavy barn door, stepping back into the blinding sunlight. The world outside the tunnel was the same, yet he was fundamentally changed. He had entered seeking answers and had found a profound understanding. He had confronted the darkness beneath his barn, and in doing so, he had found his own light, ready to face whatever the future held, not as a man haunted by the past, but as one who had finally come to terms with it. He was ready to go back to Sarah, to share his truth, and to build a future on solid, honest ground.